City of Tucson. And we'll go to my left.
Good morning. My name is Karen Longoria.
Dan Grossman, Town of Marana.
Heidi Lasham, Town of Marana.
Jose Rodriguez, Town of Oro Valley.
Natalie Shep, Pima County Department of Environmental Quality.
Paul Casertano with Pima County Transportation.
Peterson and Pag.
Rick Ellis with PAG.
Andy Bemis with Tucson Department of Transportation.
David Zinda with PAG.
Jamie Brown with Pag.
Mark Hoffman, ADOT Planning. Rod Lane, ADOT South Central District.
James Chow, Pag RTA.
Catherine Skinner, Pima County Transportation.
Annette Wren, PAG.
Sonia Kelly with PAG.
All right. And online. You want to have anyone introduce themselves online?
Mead Meyer Welburn with PAG.
Mayor Truly, Federal Highway Administration.
Patricia Pablo with the Tohono O'odham Nation.
I'm Sean Lowry. I'm with Ecopia.
And
Thomas
Ted,
Garcia. Oh, sorry.
Ted Brown with the Maricopa Association of Governments.
Thomas Garcia with the Town of Sahuarita.
Anyone else online? All right, hearing none, we will move on to item 2, in-kind reporting. Jeanette Uren.
All right. Regional planning efforts are enhanced by reporting time donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. PAG collects data on the time dedicated to meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. If you're paid with federal dollars, please let us know. Time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable on the agenda and meeting materials. At the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. Time spent working on PAG RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jeanette. We'll move on to item 3, approval of the August 16, 2023 meeting summary. Have you all had an opportunity to review? Do you have any questions or comments? All right, hearing none, is there a motion to approve? Approve. Motion, is there a second?
Second.
That was Thomas Garcia, second. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Meeting summary passes unanimous. All right, we'll move on to item 4, SunCloud Ecopia mapping products, and I believe Mead Meyer is going to introduce this presentation. Mead. All right, we lost Mead.
Okay, I can go ahead.
Okay, go ahead,
Introduce the item. Thank you. Today we have Ted Brown and Sean Lowry here to present the SunCloud data portal that PAG and MAG have been part of. So I believe, Ted, were you going to present first or Sean?
I'm up first.
Okay, go ahead. I think Crystal. Okay, Crystal will advance the slides, so just let us know when you're ready for the next slide.
Wonderful. Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the Transportation Planning Committee, it's a pleasure to be here today to talk to you about the SunCloud this morning. We'll talk about what is the SunCloud, kind of the data layers and analysis tools within it, and then how you can seed your own SunCloud. Next slide. So the SunCloud is an Accelerated Innovation Deployment Grant Project, or an AID grant project that was originally awarded in 2017. ADOT, MAG, PAG, and its numerous partners were awarded $1 million to develop a data portal to increase and improve the accessibility, usability, and quality of data and analytical tools. Now, the goal of the project was to get a better understanding of kind of the needs in the corridor and align policies and strategic investments. The entire project is built on top of AZGeo, which is the State Land Department's ArcGIS online instance. Next slide, please. For our project, the Sun Corridor refers to five counties in southern Arizona. We have Maricopa, Pinal, Pima, Santa Cruz, and Cochise. These counties cover 30,000 square miles of land and somewhere in the neighborhood of 85% of the state's population. We need a large team to tackle this task. Next slide, please. And so we brought together a team of stakeholders that included all of the MPOs and COGs in the region. We had some county agencies along with us, and of course, our partners at ADOT and FHWA. Over the next 5 years, we worked together to develop and implement the platform that we're here today to discuss and proudly show off. Next slide, please. Before we get into the deep dive on the data in the platform and how it's used, I just want to touch a little bit on what makes this system unique. There's a lot of viewers and analysis tools popping up, so we took great care to make something that's useful, but also unique kind of in what it offers. So first thing is it is conflated to the ATIS network. That is the Arizona Transportation Information System. That's a linear reference system. That means it's super precise, and it's the network of record for the state, which means it's used in ADOT's federal submissions. By conflating everything to ATIS, we not only eliminated the need for buffers, but we can also present crisp and clean maps. Everything you're going to see is publicly hosted. All the data layers available on the Sun Cloud are hosted and publicly available on AZGeo. You can access and use each layer as you desire. The scale is somewhat unique. It's a mega regional scale, lots of agencies, lots of coverage, lots of lane miles. It's also a one-stop shop. As you'll see a little later on, it's flexible, it's adaptable. It allows you to go from data exploration all the way through scoring actual networks. We also have a great breadth of data. We have data that touches on nearly all aspects of traditional transportation planning, and we've paid particular attention to incorporate layers that will be useful for competitive grant applications. We also have some new data sets. We've taken great pains to ensure that we aren't duplicating any layers that are already out there, although we have in a few instances combined those layers to create new, more useful versions of them, the best example being the environmental indicators layer. I say this one tongue in cheek, we have comprehensive metadata. As you'll see, the metadata on our layers and the methodology is immaculate. It's kind of the boring part at the end of the project where you have to go in and fill in all the records, but it's super, super useful and handy for us to have. And finally, as you know, FHWA and FTA always want to see us move more and more in the realm of performance-based planning, and this tool is a great big step in that direction. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, the tool exists on the AZGeo Data Hub. So for this project, we work with an outstanding and talented consultant team to assemble the data sets and build the tools. For those who want to get a little weedier, everything is built using Esri's Experience Builder platform, and a link to the code repository is at the end of the presentation. On to the fun stuff, the data layers. Next slide, please. So innovation is obviously going to be a focus when you're funded by an accelerated innovation deployment grant. So in addition to improving some of the traditional transportation metrics, we've also partnered with some new friends, old friends, to bring some new data sets to this party. Next slide, please. First up, mobility. We have mega regional transit routes and ridership, as well as what I kind of call stock reliability and delay data from INRIX, our other layers. We also had to create some ancillary data because ATIS is the network of record. It contains current roadways, not necessarily future roadways. So we had to pull those out of the 4 models, anything that was 2020 or in the future, and document those and digitize them to the best of our ability. Next slide, please. So in addition to transit, we wanted to include some other multimodal options on the map, but we needed a way to quickly and affordably collect that data. Through our friends at PAG, we found a company called Acopia, who you'll hear more from shortly, that has trained an algorithm to ingest ortho imagery and produce GIS layers. We asked them to run this process for bike lanes, sidewalks, and medians on our arterial network. And you may wonder why medians. All along the way, we wanted this process to be automated and repeatable. And frankly, we had a little trouble with dual carriageways and how they're represented in a travel demand model versus the ATIS network. So this data set greatly helped us improve and QA that process. Back to bike lanes, though, Meg undertook extensive analysis of our regional bikeways layer compared to what Acopia's algorithm produced. And I have to say we were very, very happy with the results. The image on the screen here shows you a little example of how this improved or at least changed our process. The purple lines represent what we had in the MAG bikeways layer, and kind of those yellow blobs represent what the data layer we received from Acopia contains. As you can see, not only is it a much more precise geospatial representation, but we also got the width of the bike lanes. Tons of great information in there, and you'll be hearing more about it shortly. Next slide, please. Next up is safety. Now this data set is well trod, but we've taken things a step further by applying methodology from the Highway Safety Manual to help identify areas that are dangerous as opposed to those that are just busy or unlucky. To do that, we've combined crash data from ADOT with our travel demand model AADTs and the best available safety performance functions. Now, this process is particularly new or novel, but it had not been applied in 4 of the 5 counties we cover. Kudos to PAG and to Pima County for being the only one who had previously implemented this. The ability to evaluate projects based on something other than just crash rate is a big step forward. The ability to evaluate projects based on something predictive is a huge leap forward for us. Next slide, please. And next up is pavement condition. So MAG went through an exercise where we collected pavement condition from all 27 cities and 3 native nations to produce an arterial pavement condition layer. And frankly, that was just a ton of work. Nevertheless, we wanted to use the same methodology for the sun cloud and quickly realized we were playing an entirely different game. So we turned to Wejo and more directly to their partner, Neurodynamics, for a solution. They, and I wanted to quote this so I don't misspeak, they leverage individual wheel speed via rotational sensors in combination with drivetrain information to provide pavement quality information in production vehicles. Great new technology. Indiana DOT had done a fairly extensive study with them and found the data to be of good quality. Our analysis showed exactly the same. This data set has a huge advantage for us, namely that it provides uniformly collected data from across the region, and secondarily that it provides recent data as we've limited our data to only the last 12 months. Next slide, please. We heard loud and clear from our rural partners about how important something like broadband data could be to them, so we sought out a company called Ookla to procure some broadband data. You may not have heard of Ookla, but you've probably been to speedtest.net or fast.com to check your internet speeds. A curated version of that data is what's available in our broadband data layer. We have distinctions for both fixed and mobile broadband data, as well as speed and availability. Just a note on the categories here, those are the FTC categories, which are fine, but perhaps a bit low in our streaming and work from home culture, but that's what the feds use, so that's what we're going to use. As many of you know, the Investment in Infrastructure and Jobs Act has a lot of money for broadband, and we hope a tool like this can help bring some of that to Arizona. Next slide. And finally, the disadvantaged facility users layer, and this is probably my favorite layer in the tool. So before this, all of our equity scores were based on proximity. You are near a community of concern or an equity priority community, so you get the points. That's a less than ideal methodology as it doesn't take into account who's actually using the roadways in question. So we partnered with Replica and essentially had them run a select link analysis on each segment in the entire network. What that means is that for each segment, we get a report about each roadway user's home location. So from there, we can combine that data with the climate and economic justice screening tool, more commonly called Justice 40. And with those two pieces of information, we can calculate the percentage of roadway users who have a home location in a disadvantaged community. That's a monumental step forward in terms of how we can score equity. And I think the picture on the right here best illustrates how that plays out in the real world. Let me just orient you for a sec. The map is centered on the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community. The Beeline Highway or State Route 87 runs directly through it to connect Mesa to Fountain Hills. Now on this map, the lighter the background, the more Justice 40 boxes it ticks. The darker the segment, the higher percentage of disadvantaged facility users utilizing the roadway. So in the past, all of the dark brown would have been given the same equity score. But with our new layer, you can see that actually the number of disadvantaged facility users on the Beeline Highway is quite low, 13%. And if you look at the arterial roadways just northwest of it, you can see those really dark purple arterial roadways denoting a high percentage of disadvantaged facility users. Now, obviously, we would score these much, much differently than we had in the past. Next slide, please. All right, now that we know what's kind of in the tool, let's talk about how we can use the platform. Next slide. We tried to design this platform with maximum flexibility, but also ease of use. So we've tried to incorporate like common and useful tools that you would see in others. So you can easily switch symbolization between commonly used attributes for each layer. You can filter the data by attributes or geography to drill down into what you're looking for. You can print maps for inclusions in reports and emails. And finally, you can directly export the data for further analysis in the software of your choice. Next slide, please. And on that note, you can export that data in two different ways. You can directly access the data through ArcGIS Online and add it to your own ArcGIS maps. Or from the platform itself, you can export to JSON, CSV, or GeoJSON. So all this data is awesome, but we need to take it a step further to really apply it. Next slide, please. And here we are. We've grouped these into what we think are a logical bunchings of metrics and categories, but I want to be very clear that we understand that you or your agency may not value these data sets or groupings the same way that we do, and we've addressed that, and I'll touch on it in just a minute. You may also be thinking that those are some really diverse data sets, and how in the heck are we going to combine them to make it into a meaningful score? And that's a great question, but we have to talk about equity first. Next slide, please. So including equity as another metric among a sea of metrics seemed like it downplayed its continued importance in creating an equitable transportation system. So instead, we have included equity as a multiplier. And the value of that multiplier is decided by the disadvantaged facility users layer that we talked about a moment ago. So let's kind of just run through that process once. Next slide, please. Now I can and have spent 30 minutes on this slide in the past, but I'm not going to bore you with that. And no, I don't expect you to read it. But the general process is for each segment of the roadway, the data that we need is identified and collected. And where possible, we convert it to a rate or an average or a per capita. And now that we have data that is somewhat apples to apples, we normalize it. Data normalization just means converting it to a 0 to 100 point scale. We've used various methods for doing this. We just clip outliers in some cases. We do log transformation in other cases. We've documented each step and decision made, as we know that the scores are often where we get the most scrutiny. Once we have the normalized data, we then multiply it by the user-defined weight, then multiply by the equity factor to create a single number score for each criteria. Then we rinse and repeat for each criteria you want to include in your analysis. Next slide, please. And that's how we turned a platform into a scoring engine and created a fully scored network. So we ran the entire network and calculated scores based on the performance measures from just a slide ago. And then we grouped those in various ways to provide users with out-of-the-box utility. Just want to see safety scores, no problem. We have a button for that. Have a question about how a specific criteria stacks up either regionally or mega regionally, no problem. We have buttons for that. But then we took it a few steps further. Next slide. And the first way was by building a dashboard to more quickly analyze the scores. And then we linked that dashboard to the geography. So up in the top left, for example, you can switch to filter down to whatever geography you want, whether that be county, MPO, or even city. You can also click the little arrows in each area to see individual scores within the category. So if you click on the arrow next to asset condition, you'll see the individual scores for bridge condition and pavement condition. Down in the bottom right, you can see a breakdown of how each normalized score is playing into the overall score. So for example, this is Cochise County. Here in Cochise County, forecasted VMT and excess expected crashes are playing the largest role in the overall scoring. Now, I think if we stopped here, we probably could have claimed the victory and called it a day, but there was a little more to do. Next slide. Our motto throughout this project was that old Muhammad Ali quote about different strokes for different folks. And this is the culmination, I think, of that ethos. I spent the last few minutes talking about how we developed and weighted scores. And in those examples, we've provided our recommendations based on nationwide best practices and professional judgment. But we knew that with a dozen agencies involved and data coverage for dozens more, there was just no way that we were going to successfully land on one weighting scheme that was going to make everybody happy. So instead, we built a widget where you can set your own weights on the fly in your browser and then rescore the entire 5-county area in seconds. Bridges not important to you, set it to 0 and rerun. If you think reliability is a more important factor in new capacity projects, you can crank that puppy up, hit rescore, and away you go with a bespoke set of weights tailored to your needs. We are very, very proud of this feature and the flexibility that we hope it provides our end users. Next slide, please. The site is live and ready to go. I hope you all use it. And if you do, I hope you will do me a favor. We've done everything that we can think of to QA QC this platform, but I am absolutely certain that somebody in this virtual room will have some local knowledge, a cool new browser that we haven't tested, or some unique combination of clicks that makes the site act a little kooky. When that happens, please, please, please reach out to us so that we can fix it. It's only going to be as good as our testing and our feedback that we get, and we are constantly improving and working on this platform. Next slide, please. Now, if you really want extra credit, we've actually hosted the entire code repository on Bitbucket. So any of the tech inclined among you can fork the repository and begin working on your own version. I also want to note that we have a 75-minute training video that takes you through every step of how to actually use the platform and get out of it what you need. That's hosted at the link on the slide. It's also in the platform itself. Next slide. Finally, I just want to say thank you for your time and attention. I'm often asked what is the future of the Sun Cloud, so maybe I'll just tackle that one now. It's a great question, and the short answer is We don't know yet. The longer answer is that it's already being used by agencies. SCMPO has used it for a RAISE grant. SVMPO is using it for their equity reports. We seem to have an interested core willing to put forth the effort to keep the platform up to date. The big question mark, as always, is funding. So most of the data in the platform is federally available, and MAG calculates it for the state as a byproduct of our work. But other data sets like the broadband data, the pavement condition data comes with a cost. And they don't stay as evergreen as some of our other data sets. So in the coming months, I think in November, the core agency team will be meeting again to discuss options for the future. We're also open to including more areas as we continue to refine the platform. As I said, some of the data we are already calculating to state anyway, so those will be straightforward to update, and we will be updating those. Personally, I'd like to see if ADOT could make some funds available, but we're going to keep talking, we're going to keep working, and we're going to see what happens. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ted. Next up is Sean Lowry with Ecopia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it. I'm lucky, to bring just a small piece to this project. We were a little bit late to the game. I had kind of run into Ted through a contact at PAG, and time was ticking, and I wanted to figure out a way to contribute somehow. So we kind of took a really big area and tried to bring some value to the table with the way we can map really fast, and it turned out really well. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit about us, but also cover a little bit about the data that we contributed as part of the project. Next slide, please. So I have a lot of, as a mapping company, I have a lot of slides with imagery and maps. So hopefully you guys don't get sick of me saying next slide. I kind of hoped I was controlling it, but we'll wing it. Next slide, please. So our vision, we're trying to create a digital twin, a geospatial digital twin of cities across the world. So we do anything and everything we can to take pictures, basically, aerial, satellite, drone, street, and turn them into map data that is accurate and can be used by folks like your agencies to create the analytics that you need to for your citizens. And so you go next slide, please. So we cut our teeth doing building footprints on satellite imagery. We started about 10 years ago. And over time, we just got a lot better at that. We ended up kind of doing all the building footprints in Australia first, and then the United States next, and then sub-Saharan Africa. So we've been fortunate to do some big projects and really honing our scalability of being able to turn imagery into vector polygons that we can use. Next slide, please. So here's kind of how it works. This is a normal aerial image I'm sure you're familiar with. Next slide. We turn them into a bunch of features like vector polygon features. So we grew up a little bit from doing building footprints and started thinking about what is everything we can see in the picture, right? From next slide, please. From forest to water to buildings to roads to sidewalks to what we wanted our product to look like is a GIS professional sat down at using mapping software and traced everything by hand and categorized it into different fields. And that's the product you end up with. So, there's a lot of AI out there that just does a lot of automated results, and it's kind of like, here, go live with it. And we're not exactly sure what's perfectly correct and not. We took a lot of time to make it look like products that government agencies were used to procuring or making themselves. Next slide, please. All right, one more. So a little bit of how it works. So Ted mentioned we have algorithms that extract these things, and we absolutely do. And that's the bulk of how the data is made. We always have had humans in the loop. We had a lot of humans in the loop to begin with. in order to train these algorithms and to figure out how to scalably do QC on the data. Now, over time, we created kind of these quote unquote perfect vector layers and use that data to go back into the algorithm and further train. And over time, we just got like really good at our initial outputs being really accurate. We still use humans for edge cases. You know, there's always tricks. I was even looking at the data yesterday and noticed a little segment that we missed. So it's not 100% perfect, but it's pretty darn good as far as how cheaply we were able to do this and how much area we could cover. And I think that's the only reason we were able to participate in this project near the end. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have a bevy of imagery partners. I actually grew up in the satellite imagery space. We use Nearmap, we use Hexagon, who is collecting a lot of more data on content. For this project, we used PAG and MAG imagery that has been normally collected or sourced through your normal business. But in between, we had to find imagery to use to do the major arterials, which I'll show you in a little bit. So we had to go source Hexagon data that I believe they collected as part of the NAPE program. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide. And you can kind of roll through these slides pretty quick. So this is just an area in Baltimore. This is what they had previously available just from their own kind of internal mapping efforts. And then next slide. This is what we were able to do with the data, just kind of grabbing as much like sidewalk pathway data as much as possible. And then next slide. And then this is the data, and excuse me for looking over because I wanted to see what the different colors. Okay, so this is the data and it's like segmented by width of sidewalks. So anything in green is over 6 feet and is totally ADA, which is an ADA requirement. You guys definitely know that better than I. Orange and yellow is kind of 4 to 6 feet wide, and anything in red is less than 4 feet. So it's just an example of kind of putting more attribution with the data that comes out. So we went from building footprints to trying to get as much stuff out of aerial imagery. And now we're kind of trying to figure out, and meetings like this absolutely are great because they're like so informative of like, how does our data help agencies like yours create the analytics that you need to? And so it's been like we've been learning a lot, I'd say, over the last, 4 or 5 years of, what are the specific features that, like, how can we really push it? What can we get from 6-inch resolution as opposed to 12-inch resolution to 3-inch resolution or oblique imagery? Can we go collect street data at scale? How much of the on the field data collection do you all have to do that perhaps can be replaced now that AI has kind of gotten good enough to map as well as a human can? How can we repurpose our colleagues' jobs into like creating analytics rather than tracing imagery? Next slide, please. Okay, so getting into the SunCloud. So so Ted gave me an awesome, these are called shapefiles, an awesome shapefile of the major arterials in the SunCloud network. So you can see all these crazy polygons, just looks like a buffer over the major roads. And then we had a smaller area, like while we were doing the mapping, we wanted to take a smaller area in Tucson and kind of push as much mapping as we could, just so we had something to look at, something to kind of assess to see if it could help out in the future with either the SunCloud or other mapping initiatives. So it ended up being 6,240 linear miles, 360 square miles, so they're pretty thin. And then that inner AOI sample in Tucson was roughly 5 square kilometers, I think like 3 square miles. Next slide. Okay, so in Tucson and Phoenix, we had your imagery that was 6-inch resolution. You can pull stuff out of there a lot better. So the sidewalk polygons, the bike lanes, and whether or not like they were painted or not painted in the width. So these are some of the attribution we put on it. The medians, whether they're raised with vegetation, painted or split. I think Ted mentioned those dual carriageways. Everywhere else that wasn't in those kind of like Tucson, Phoenix coverage, I mentioned that earlier, we had to use 12-inch resolution imagery. It was a little bit older. That's just sometimes kind of the sacrifice you make. And so that one, since it's less resolution, it was just sidewalk lines, bike lane lines, and polygons of the medians. We had real fun. Ted can attest to shipping hard drives up to us. PAG, it went smooth. MAG, it didn't. We kind of lost a hard drive. I don't know what happened, but we managed to reship it. All imagery received May 3rd, which kind of put us against a tight deadline, but we were able to do all the mapping within 55 calendar days, which is awesome. We could probably push it more, but what we kind of do is it takes a little bit to set up projects. And then once we get projects cooking, we can do lots of it at a time. So next slide. Okay, but that wasn't all that we normally do on our transportation like deliverables. So this was San Bernardino County, where we got more into like the different lanes, the different types of crosswalks, shoulders, some kind of vegetation around the right of way, things like that. It was just definitely like, let's do a quick hit as fast as we can to help out the sun cloud as much as possible. But certainly there's a lot more to map. And that kind of segues to the next slide. So I showed you this earlier. This was pretty cool. This is like a lot of features, right, that we kind of normally do. I wanted to bring this up so we could kind of look at what we did with Tucson and kind of see how far we dove into that. So next slide, please. So here's Tucson, and that's your imagery. Next slide. So this is the map we created in that small little inner AOI. And the next slide has the legend. So it was a ton of stuff. Sometimes it can almost be like overwhelming. So we still kind of have some discussions to have with PAG and with MAG even on just kind of like, this is an example of really putting the pedal to the metal, as opposed to just like, helping as quick as we can with SunCloud. So this data is out there. We have it on Slippy Map. You guys have, PAG has it on their servers, and it's up to be pushed around and pulled and critiqued and discussed and everything above. Next slide, please. I wanted to highlight one cool thing. So maybe you can kind of like hit these slides in succession. So you got imagery here, and this is the normal output you just saw. Next slide. So what we did is this is overlapping canopy. I know it's really hot down there. I'm in Colorado. It's a little cooler. It is hot in summer. But we know it's important to kind of figure out the hot spots and see if we can somehow map like where shade might be happening, and making sure that's equitable. So next slide. So that's all the canopy just kind of as it is against the city. And the next slide shows the real imagery. So cool little one I wanted to highlight, which I think is helping kind of understand, not just like, hey, let's map transportation layers, but also let's map things that could impact, mobility and make it more equitable, make it more convenient, make it more pleasurable to use sidewalks and the infrastructure that we have in place. Last slide. Okay, so the last one is just kind of like a little peek at where we're trying to go, right? So a lot of what we did here was with aerial imagery. we work with companies like Nearmap that do a lot of oblique imagery. So we're starting to look at, what can we see from like those 3-inch or 4-inch views from the side. Up in the upper right, that's a camera system that we just created and we're using as a project for the city of Toronto. So we're starting to collect more street and LiDAR data and experimenting with that. So that's where we're getting into, pedestals and power poles and street lights and maybe sign inventories and pavement inventories, paint striping and messages. We're trying to kind of gather that up. We're a young company. We certainly have ambitions to grow and even maybe raise capital in the future and apply that to scaling up stuff like that. We believe our AI can scale these big projects. And so we're looking for forward-leaning agencies. You guys have been great so far on where can we push it? Where can we try to do as much mapping from cameras as possible to help with agencies to do their job? I hope that wasn't too salesy. I wasn't trying to I wanted to just make it cool about mapping. But anyway, I appreciate your time. Thanks. Oh, next slide is my thank you slide. I don't know if you guys send this around. Both of these links here, you can click on it and just kind of zoom around that Tucson sample or the SunCloud sample. Just like a little web map we made. It's definitely not as cool as the actual SunCloud platform.
All right, thank you, Sean. And Mead, I don't know if you were able to hop back on. Do you have anything? Oh, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Well, just that we'd love people's feedback on different uses they see they could have from this data, any additional data they would want. And we'll also have a meeting in more detail about it at our regional data working group for your GIS context to get into the nitty-gritty stuff.
Fantastic.
But thanks.
Thanks, Mead, and thank you, Ed and Sean. We appreciate you coming to our meeting today.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll make the presentation available to the committee as well.
All right, great. Yes, thank you both to our presenters. Super cool stuff. We look forward to exploring it more. Let's move on to item 5, Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan RMAP update. Hannah Oden.
Emma cannot be with us today, so I'll go ahead and give the update. As many of you know, we are in the midst of putting our projects in the project portal, and I wanted to thank everybody here for diving into that exercise and also reaching out to Peter and myself to help get through some of those sticky areas. We appreciate your feedback and also your patience with us. Our deadline for putting the projects in is Friday, and I realize that is kind of ambitious, especially for some of the bigger jurisdictions with lots of projects. So get in there this week and let us know if there's some issues that you have, or if you need any more assistance, and we have time to work through that. That is really the biggest update. If anyone is having trouble, please let us know. And what we'll be doing in the next week, the next couple weeks after we close the portal, is trying to clean that up, any information or any anomalies that are in there, make sure that it's ready for a presentation to this committee in the near future, hopefully by next month, but we'll see how much work needs to get done. We'll get it to you, but thank you so much for doing that. We also have some data updates that we're going to be adding to that now that the projects are in. So Peter's hustling, and we'll be rolling that out. And as we do, we'll be in touch with everybody on the committee.
Great.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Any questions for Jeanette?
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. The closing of the portal, when do you anticipate that? So we will have entered our first round of projects, and what I've told staff is to kind of focus on those capacity changing projects so that the modeling team can begin to dig in and take a look at what we're proposing that will affect the modeling work that needs to get going as soon as possible. But we're hoping that we may be able to have an opportunity to kind of verify that our numbers are what we want to see in there and may make a couple adjustments here and there. So I'm wondering what that might look like if we have that need.
Yeah, sure. Our ask really for Friday is that you just get in there and get as much as you can. We're not gonna close it and say, you're done, no more. You're welcome.
Wait, no, it's not what we wanted at all.
We hope to have the list itself completed by the end of the year. So there'll be some periodic check-ins with everybody to make sure we're headed down the right track. Recognizing that Rick and HDR are still wrapping up some cost estimation work going on for RTA Next. We anticipate those numbers being added and adjusted along the way. So it's not it's closed, the lid is on it and screwed shut. We'll be in there working and working along with your teams as well.
And just to follow up to that, we had talked a little bit about those projects that are owned by everyone. Are you guys envisioning some sort of workshop with this group or something so that we can talk through like what does region-wide bike boulevards look like and what should that number look like in terms of anticipated mileage for the city of Tucson and the other jurisdictions? And does that scale of number look right, or is it just off, or how do you
Yeah, so
envision going
we're
through that?
in there right now, kind of examining that information and looking at, where those cards are going to fall. And so what we anticipate doing is sifting through some of that stuff, coming up with some recommendations and bringing it back to this group to kind of talk through how we did that and get some feedback from you on, did we miss the mark? Did we hit it? And, where do we need to make some adjustments? So we anticipate, doing some of that front end work for you guys, bringing it back to the committee. If it's extensive, like something that we're going to need to sit down for more than an hour to talk about, we'll probably do a subcommittee of just the experts that need to be involved in that. But if it's starting to look pretty cut and dry and pretty clear, we might just bring it to this committee.
And then, finally going from the universe of projects, that's probably going to be somewhat substantial, and the galaxy of funding that's going to be significantly smaller. I know in the past there had been, a few different scoring options that were presented to the technical advisory committee over RMAP, and they kind of noodled around with that. That served as at least a contributing tool to help whittle down those projects and make sense of what the final in-plan list should look like from both the jurisdictional perspective as well as the multiple agency perspective. Are you looking at something similar? I'm real interested in the custom tool functionality from SunCloud. We had talked about that for years at PAG so that we kind of scale weighting and whatnot and apply it to RMAP or to TIP or to a specialty transportation plan or what have you. So how do you envision going from, I don't know, 30, 40 billion dollars of project needs down to the bucket of 16 to 20 billion dollars?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a monumental effort, right? Because we're going to be looking at, in some jurisdictions case, over 100 projects.
Right.
So, we are definitely going to rely on this committee, and especially those of you who are in there looking at those projects, to be very realistic with your timeframes. So, you're not going to have 100 projects happen in the first 10 years of the RMAP, right? So give careful consideration to that first and foremost. And then, yes, we'll have to begin looking at the information that we can push to the portal and how we can do some project selection in that. Me and her team and Peter and my group were kind of sifting into that, especially now that SunCloud is available to us and we can start to utilize some of those really cool functions. So we're sifting through that right now and trying to see how best we can apply it. But yeah, that's going to be an important step. Once we have everything in the portal, once we see where we're landing, and then once we determine that exact fiscal constraint cost, which we've brought to this committee before. About this time last year, we were working through that, and we'll be just refreshing that and making sure that we have those factors all together so we can start making some of those decisions.
And then on the performance measure side, are you expecting to kind of just carry forward the performance measures that are currently in RMAP? Or are you expecting an overhaul of that?
We're not expecting a huge overhaul, but we are going to be bringing some recommendations over the next several TPC meetings, because there are some obviously that are required that we're going to keep working on, but we'll have to have some conversations about the best ways to track some of that stuff. Plus, Hunsu and his team are utilizing new data sets that have sort of more advanced capability to track performance. So we've been working with him and his group to see when some of that might be available and if we can roll it into this go round of the RMAP. So we're taking a look at some of those opportunities where maybe we can consolidate, or looking at those performance measures and tracking and asking the real hard question of, is this tracking something that's really valuable to us, that really means something to the process? So we're looking at that right now in what data sets we have, what makes sense, and also what's feasible to accomplish in the next year. So we will be bringing some of that. We anticipate September, October, November, we'll have some of those presentations here.
And so do you also expect a target setting exercise similar to what's happened in the past with RMAP in terms of reductions in congestion and improvements to safety and things of that nature?
We do, and it'll start more as a conversation of, these are the targets that we had. Does it make sense to keep going down that track, or do we need to re-examine our targets? We anticipate some of them, we're tracking the target, we'll keep going that direction. Others will have to either set a new target because it's a completely different performance measure, completely different data set. But yeah, we'll be having those conversations here where we're looking at, first and foremost, like, do we need this? Are we tracking to a target that makes sense? If not, why? And those kind of questions, and then actually diving into the individual targets themselves. We anticipate some of them will be as simple as, yeah, that's good. And we'll probably bring those as a recommendation, but there'll be others where we need to have more in-depth discussion.
Any other questions?
Jose?
Are we addressing the transit element on the RMAP?
Yes, the transit projects will be in the RMAP. As you know, transit right now is a hot topic in discussion in RTA Next. So really what we need to be prepared to do is reflect what is tracking towards RTA Next and how that's going to be reflected in the RMAP. That's very similar to how we did the last one, where we're looking at those funding categories. But yes, I mean, we're going to be relying on city and Suntran as well to participate in that. But we do have our transit folks here in-house that are writing that up and examining everything. And there was a lot of information that came out of the COA that'll be incorporated in as well.
Questions? Not online. It's with information only. So we will move on to item 6, future agenda items. I know I have some from the last meeting, but before I go to those, any future agenda items anyone wants to bring up?
I would just encourage, continuing that conversation on our map. I think there's a lot of decision points that are going to need to be discussed. So I don't know if that needs to be a standing item or what the best way to deal with that is, but I'd sure like to have more conversation with this group as we go finalize the list.
Well, sounds like there'll be more RMAP items coming forward. I had 3 from the last meeting. One was an update on the TIP process. The other was, I think it was an overview of the Justice 40 tool. And Natalie, was that your item you requested? And then a discussion on the South Country Club project that was proposed by the airport RTA Next. I think this was requested by Pima County. So did anybody want to comment on those items? I can't remember who requested the TIP process update. Paul, was that you?
Not guilty.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, if I
Yeah.
may, we will be addressing that in the subcommittee meeting.
Okay. Okay, good. Natalie, on the Justice 40 tool, can you remind me what you wanted to talk about on that one?
Well, it's kind of in line with what we learned today with this tool. I guess I'm curious where the actual decision-making around the equity piece is going to be incorporated into transportation planning. I don't really see that in this committee. So I'm curious to know kind of how that process will work, especially now that we have federal funding requirements with Justice 40. So I'm curious to know how this committee is addressing that, and maybe it's at an individual jurisdictional level. I'm not really sure, but I do think it needs to be part of the transportation planning process.
Thank you, Natalie. And Catherine, on the country club grant discussion, is that something you still wanted to see on a future agenda?
Yeah, it was one of the requests from MC when they removed the project from the RTA next list. They asked that it come to this group to discuss how we may go after federal grants. So, you know, those are on a constant cycle, but if we don't start talking about it soon, you know, IIJ may be over.
Catherine, is that the conversation specific to that project or in terms of how we as a region chase federal grants?
I think ideally, you know, it was prompted by the project, but I think ideally it would be beneficial to us in this region if we started talking about how we tackle these grants in a more cooperative way or focused way. So it would be great to have a discussion. Also, like, where have our successes been so that we can all learn from those successes, because we do have a year of chasing a lot of federal grants. All had successes and failures, so.
Okay. Sure. When do you have a target date? Because I know this request came out of your administrator's office. You like to see that agenda?
The sooner the better.
Okay. All right. Any other future agenda items? All right, hearing none, we'll move to adjournment. I hear no objection, so we'll call the meeting adjourned at 9:52. Do you want to take a quick break and then we'll reconvene at 10 o'clock? Okay. All right, we'll reconvene at 10 o'clock for the Tip Subcommittee. Thank you, everyone.
We can do one. Because they gives that offer for it, but
All right, everyone, I think we have everyone back and I'd like to get started, call the meeting to order. It's now 10:05. My name is Carolyn Laurie. I'm the Start with introductions, please.
Dan Grossman, Town of Marana.
Heidi Lasham, Town of Marana.
Jose Rodriguez, Town of Morpont.
Paul Casertano, Pima County DOT.
Rick Ellis, PAG. David Zinda, PAG.
Jamie Brown with PAG.
Rick Hoffman, ADOT planning.
Rod Lane, ADOT South Central District.
James Chow, PAG RTA.
Catherine Skinner, Pima County Transportation.
Nadia Ryan, PAG.
Tony Cruz,
Sam Prudio, City of Tucson.
Andy Bemis, City of Tucson.
Scott Robidoux, Tucson Airport Authority.
anyone else online with us?
Thomas Garcia, Town of Sarita.
Patricia Pablo with the Tono Autumn Nation.
Good morning, Patricia. Thanks for joining us. We see your name, but perhaps your microphone is muted. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. With that, I'd like to move into item number 2, in-kind reporting. Regional planning efforts are enhanced by reporting times donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. PAG collects data on the time dedicated to meetings and activities to apply towards the use of matching funds for grants and federal dollars. If you are paid with federal dollars, please let us know. Time spent in preparation of this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and meeting material. At the time of conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent. Time spent working on PAG RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects also may be eligible for considerations for matching funds. Thank you. With that, we move into item number 3, tip rollover update, which I'll be presenting. This is an informational item. Some of you may have noticed we ran our tip rollovers just a little bit different this year. We wanted to move forward with rolling the HERF dollars quickly as possible. That way we can allow funds to be reimbursed throughout the region. Also in response to some requests that we've had from stakeholders regarding to the closeout of the 13th month of the year. That providing a little bit of extra time of about 40 days there would allow our RTA budget numbers to be more accurate. With James's help, we are able to complete that closeout. For that. Rollover wise, the first half with the HERF dollars, as you know, we have 2 flavors of HERF dollars. We have just our traditional HERF user revenue fund, 12.6%. And with those this year, we rolled over 88,000. A small number. We're getting to the end of that funding source for now. For HERF Regional 12R or regional funds, we rolled over 52,594,000. And that number was a little high for us this year. We did hear that it would be nice if we could do some bubble funding down this calendar year, which we shall. On the RTA side of the house, with tip amendment number 20.2204, we rolled 134,557,240 total roll for the RTA projects that's currently programmed for TIP. This year, we also rolled our local funding in that category. As some of you may remember, in the recent past, we requested that to keep a close eye on report on our local funds. So we ask that continue to think about moving forward, and we do have our tip development process coming up. So if you weren't able to provide those numbers to us during the rollover session, perhaps you can provide those updated numbers to us then. Finally, with the rollovers, we did identify several projects that would be eligible for the RTA exchange program. As everyone in the room knows, we're getting close to the end of the RTA first life cycle, and we would like to be able to utilize all those funds. If you have projects that have been completed, but perhaps still have some RTA funding available to you, let's get that money activated on different projects out to us. Jamie, Rick, and of us to help with that process. Are there any questions on the RTA on the tip rollover? Thank you. Moving on to item number 4, review of the updated federal surface transportation block grant funding projections for fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 2028.
Hello. Yes, the volunteer guy got fired. I am in his place now. It's nice to meet you all for the first time. I am David Zinda, and just wanted to go over this memo that you probably have seen at this point regarding some federal funding reductions. Unfortunately, federal funding is kind of interesting, especially when we look at the federal aid highway programs. First of all, Arizona gets about 1.8%-ish of total apportionments across the nation, a number that's not changed since 2006, even though our population now constitutes about 2% of the total population in the United States. So we see some misfortune there, but also we have a new census, new numbers have come through, and even though here in the Tucson urban area, in the PAG planning region, we have seen an increase in population. It is the case that some of the urban areas in Phoenix have seen a much more higher increase in population relative to PAG. So STBG comes down from US Department of Transportation, FHWA, goes into ADOT. About 50% of it, I believe, is retained by ADOT, and the other 50% is sub-allocated to different urban areas based on these population regions. Now MAG has a greater share of that population, which means we get less STBG in that greater than 200 region, which constitutes the Tucson urban area. That also includes Marana, Oro Valley, large parts of Pima County, Pasquayaki tribe, even the Tanaatam in the San Javier district. So this is consequential for all of us. Here you can see the population breakdowns a little bit. MAG share of the population's gone from 81 to 83. PAG's dropped from 18, almost 19 to 16 and a half. So for fiscal year 24, we thought originally based on trends that we would have here in the PAG region about $16.5 million of STBG greater than 200,000. Best indications from ADOT, and I do not expect it to change, we're going to drop that to about 15.3. That's a difference from about 1.2 million, 7.2% change. And that's going to kind of compound then through the remainder of our horizon. So 25 and 26, as you can see, they are increased a little bit, precisely by 2% per year. And that is based on historic trends. And ADOT has also confirmed that from 24 to 25, there'll be a 2% increase, and from 25 to 26. 27 and 28, that is a non-IIJA world. So we don't really know how much money we're going to have. I would recommend that we keep it constant at that fiscal year 26 level. I've looked back all the way to 2003 on STBG, specifically in this population band, and it seems that every time we've had a surface transportation authorization expire, normally more often than not, they just throw out a continuing resolution and it stays the same. If the Congress is able to pass something new, it might increase, but that's difficult to tell by how much. So my recommended action would be to adopt these numbers, the bolded ones, for planning purposes as you continue to program for the tip and look for our next activity on the next agenda item. I can tell you 24 through 26 is probably not going to change whether you adopt it or not, but 27, 28, I think we're pretty safe to keep that constant. My one final note is I don't know currently yet for the lower population bands, and I don't think ADOT fully knows either. So we'll have to wait to see what happens there. I have no idea whether Phoenix or these other areas of the state in greater Arizona have increased or decreased relative to PAG's lower population band regions. Lastly, this is going to affect also our tag greater than 200, but I don't see any problems with what we have currently programmed there, and certainly that's not the focus of our discussion today, but I don't think you have to worry about that one. Do I have another slide? I don't think I do. Okay, so with that, I guess I would, if anyone would so feel moved to move a motion, it would be nice to be able to adopt these so we can go to our next phase of this meeting and start looking at individual projects and allocate federal funding to them.
I have a question. So a portion of the STBG goes to funding PAG's overall work program. Will that have a proportionate reduction in funding as well? Or is all of this difference coming from projects?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Skinner. All these difference will have to come from projects, in part because we've already approved the fiscal year 24 and 25 overall work program. We already have that funding baked into it, and I don't think that's been a subject of discussion that we've had. So we'll be looking more at projects, and we do have ways I think we're going to find in the next topic of discussion that we're going to mitigate any potentially negative impacts.
If I may add to that, my understanding too is, we're dealing with different population buckets or bands for the SDBG. And what David is presenting on is the greater than 200,000 population bands, which by policy is dedicated to fulfilling RTA roadway element project commitments, right? In terms of the other buckets, that's where the OWP comes into play. And ADOT has utilized some of the lower population bucket STBG for the expenditures related to PAG's OWP. So we do not, the OWP does not impact the greater than 200,000 population.
That's a great point. Should have said that. Thank you for covering that. That's 100% true.
Are we, we're still not talking programming 27 and 28 in our conversation later today, right? Just through 26. We are.
Are there any?
I have a follow-up on your last comment. I understand, and it makes sense to me that we're going to try to utilize the lower population bands the greatest efficiency we can. But I know we have over $4 million of STBG in the OWP, and it's not differentiated between the over 200,000 and the less than 200,000. So what component of that is the less than 200,000?
So for everything in the OWP you see for STBG, none of that is 200,000. Approximately 2.9 million is STBG less than 5, and then the remainder to get up to the 4.1 million is going to be STBG 5 to 50.
So if I may add, I think I maybe know where you're coming from. My understanding, and maybe ADOT can help with this, is that the OWP is considered regional. So there's flexibility in terms of which funding bucket the OWP can draw from. Is that where you're kind of getting at, Ms. Skinner?
Yeah, I just, without seeing the numbers, the full picture of all the different types of STBG and where it's going, I mean, the portions of the STBG that goes to the OWP is a part of the TIP program, even though it's not a project expense, those are reported in the TIP. When we have to look at fiscal constraint and all these other things, we're going to need to see that full picture. So I'm not sure taking an action on a component of a funding source, how that exactly works.
And just to add to that, back in, I think it was December, January, David had presented on the forecast for STBG, HERF 12.6, HERF 2.6, and he actually provided a packet that was multiple pages that went into greater detail about, okay, here's what's available in terms of SDBG for roadway element projects. Here's what SDBG is available for the OWP that's being subtracted out of the total apportionment. So we can provide that going forward. And in fact, and I'll talk about this later, we don't have an updated HERF forecast yet to share with you. And I'll talk more, but today we're just looking at SDBG. And so that's what the focus is, but we can package it to show more detail at further meetings. Excuse me. Mark, is there anything that you wanted to add to clarify?
No, that's correct, Mr. Chair. They said about the funding that the OWP uses in ADOT on the federal aid accounts for that under the under 200 bucket because it is regional planning and it covers all those areas. So it does pull those population ones.
Previously, the TIP subcommittee did take action on revenue projections from 24 through 26 so that we could work together to program to achieve fiscal constraint. And what we're asking for today is approval of adjustments to just the STBG because of the discussions we've had with ADOT about these forthcoming reductions in STBG greater than 200,000. So we're asking for a motion.
Any more discussion?
Would those new adjustments affect existing projects or future projects?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great question. It will affect both. So we will have to, and we're going to show a worksheet, the worksheet that you've all seen back in the winter, where we just had the columns for 24 through 26 and all the RTA roadway element projects. We're going to talk about that next. And for FY24, where this reduction goes into effect, there is a project that's going to have to see a reduction in FY24 in terms of the SDBG. And we're going to talk about how to make that project whole.
Did you all share the spreadsheet you just mentioned and the actions that were taken earlier that were kind of carrying forward in this discussion? Were those distributed to the committee before this? And if so, could you remind me of the dates I can pull them up? I just don't recall them.
So are you referring to like the January meeting where there was an approval of the forecast for 24 through 26?
And then you also mentioned the proposed project list that we all reviewed.
We didn't reshare that with the TIP subcommittee for this meeting, but we have shared all of that information with this committee previously this year. I'd have to go back and look to see when we share that with all of you.
Remind me the meetings and I'll just try to find them. I mean, I'm hesitant to make any sort of motion or take any action when I don't even really remember the context of those previous discussions, because at that time we weren't even looking at 27, 28. Now we've introduced 27, 28. We've made modifications to the population bands. We're not looking at 12, 6. So it's, it's departing from the typical process. And I just want to make sure that I'm not being premature in voting on something.
If I may, we can follow up and provide that information, that context. If there's not comfort with approving this, I do think that for this next exercise, we're going to have to use those numbers. But maybe if there's not appetite for approving them officially, we can do that at a future meeting. But we have to use those numbers for this next exercise because it's the numbers, at least for 2024, those are the numbers that ADOT has provided to us. It's not one that we determine.
So what then becomes the purpose of the action if we're bound by these numbers anyway, I guess, like the exercise is the program to what we saw on the screen. Let's program to what we saw on the screen. Look at it in more of a holistic instead of going through each gate approval process for SDBG. We're going to approve what the targets are, and then we're going to put the large rocks and then the rocks and then sand pebbles and whatnot. Like, can we just like look at the whole picture together so we can see this is how much SDBG and we need to find a home for it and it's reduced, and that's the bitter reality we have, and that's the way it goes, and that's fine. But I guess I share that same reluctance to approve each little tiny thing, and we're already bound by this exercise already. Let's look at all of the numbers that we're bound by and then program collectively so that we can find the right funding.
I'll just add, great comments, thank you. We do not yet have an updated HERF 12.6 or HERF 2.6 forecast. For HERF 12.6, we're now relying on ADOT's official 10-year forecast that is published annually in September. PAG distribution for that is not shared with us until mid-October or late October. So we won't have that update to share with you on screen like this or in that packet that we've prepared earlier until probably early November. We can, in the meantime, work with the numbers we had before and then fine tune it. But we thought, because today's exercise is going to focus on STBG, we do have these new numbers. We were asking for your approval just to formalize it because we're going to be using them. But if there's discomfort, we can come back and package it differently for all of those funding sources at the appropriate time. So I don't think it has to happen today, but these are the numbers we're going to need to work with.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense that these are the numbers. I just want to see all the numbers, I guess. And I understand that ADOT's not all the way there yet, but I think that we can have a pretty decent sense of where you think you're going to land. Short of that, we can use the old numbers with the anticipation that they're going to grow a little bit, moderately. And then we'll figure out how to sprinkle the extra HERF if there's HERF, then we can kind of follow the same strategy that we followed with programming the old HERF numbers. In the same.
So there's no requirement for us to approve it. That's what I'm hearing.
Well,
Not a
yeah.
Procedural requirement or anything to have a vote to approve this.
I would say yes and no, Madam Chair. Obviously, and I'm going to get into this next item about how different this TIP cycle is, and I really appreciate everybody's understanding. But if you look back at previous TIP cycles, and I know some of you have lived through those, you recall that, especially when PAG was developing its own HERF 12.6 and 2.6 forecast, there was a TIP subcommittee that would approve those in August. And that was one of the first steps in the process. And there was a formal vote. And that kind of allowed staff and the committees to sort of work with those numbers. I think that gives us greater comfort if we have a motion to approve, but at the same time, I'm kind of hearing that we're not ready. So I think we can still move through that exercise in the next item and get as far as we can, and we can come back with more information. But typically, we have asked the TIP subcommittee to approve the forecast as part of one of the earliest actions of the TIP development process.
I think that's a great point, but when we were doing that, it was looking at all the revenue sources. It wasn't a subcomponent of a single revenue source. And so that's my concern. And I think it might be, maybe there'll be more comfort. I don't understand what the process is. I think that's the next item on the agenda, is talking through how we envision walking through this TIP development process. And since it is going to be so different than any of us have gone through, maybe we should jump to that with the opportunity to come back to an action. If after hearing how this works, it would make more sense, but.
Sure. So I believe that we could go ahead and do that and table this item and return to it after the meeting.
Before we leave this item, can I just ask, sorry that you got there. So I'm curious about the reduced share of PAG SDBG or greater than 200,000. Are there any other impacts? Is our overall share for the sub-allocated SDBG total reduced as well, or is that remained constant? And has there or will there be any discussion in connection with the Casa Grande Accords and the proportional distribution and unrest that might exist throughout the state? Like, hey, we were getting this and now we're getting less. And I'm just curious, like, is the overall number also going down, maybe not by 7.2%, but by a certain percentage, or is it just this population band itself exclusive?
So this will be just the population band itself for this one. In aggregate, I won't know until we know the other smaller urban areas, less than 5 and 5 to 49, and how those move here and then relative to the rest of the state. And we'll have a better idea, but we presumably won't have a fixed number of STBG, TAP, that kind of thing. Is going to fluctuate with these census changes, if I'm understanding that correctly.
So we won't know for a time yet?
Yes.
Okay. However, back to the OWP part, that's already been cast. And so any project reductions that are gonna have to be suffered by the 7.2% reduction will not then be suffered within the OWP because it's already been set. If there's a 5% reduction in the other band areas, for example, we won't then see a 5% reduction in the STBG that's in the work program or other activities that are not, that have already been programmed through OWP.
I think that's a policy.
Unless there's some sort of amendment process.
Right, exactly.
If I may, my understanding is that when ADOT Financial Management Services presented the information about the reductions in SDBG greater than 200,000, they did say that maybe in 25, that they would have information about the lower population bands and any changes. And I thought they were saying it probably wouldn't be as significant, but we just don't know.
We just don't.
Sure, no, I get that. I get that. That makes sense now. I'm just curious knowing that we're seeing this, 7.2% less buying power. In addition to all the other stuff we're seeing in the market, becomes concerning on the project side. What's the overall picture for all the bands?
Mark, did I hear you say it's a policy? You started to say it's more of a policy decision.
I'm just saying, if there's a reduction in those, 25 in the lower bands funding, how that would affect, and how you use that funding and what's already approved within the work program. If there would be any amendments to the work program and any changes in the money that goes to the work program, that would be a big policy decision.
And would you feel it would also be a policy decision if there has to be a change in the 24 work program? And it's 24-25. So
yes,
if there's a 7% reduction and regional council decides, we should reduce the work program the same so that projects can stay closer to whole or just take their proportionate share, is that an action that the regional council would be making the determination on, or is that a PAG decision?
I think it's a paid work program, so not really sure how PAG would approach that. Not for me to say, but again, I mean, knowing that, right now the work program, the funds are authorized for the work program using those lower bands. It doesn't touch the over 200 funding. So, but I understand what you're saying. I mean, it would be a PAG decision on if there would be any changes as far as funding going to the work program.
So essentially the 24 money, they've already submitted the obligation. So
Yes.
that's why
That's right.
that makes sense.
So we know that the STBG and the transportation alternatives, which is a subset of STBG, are impacted by the banding, the population banding. Can you remind me, is the carbon reduction program subject to the banding, or is that just a whole sub-allocated pot that's to be used in the entire MPO area?
It also has bands.
It also has bands. So all bands are encapsulated in the work program for the carbon reduction program total costs. But the over 200,000 for STBG as per policy from RTA board of 2014 to dedicate those funds to the completion. Just saying it out loud helps make sense of it all.
Thank you. And I'm glad you said that because it's getting more complex, obviously, and we're working very closely with ADOT to make sure that we're as clear as possible when we communicate this to you. And if there are ways in which we can improve our clarity, just let us know. But we are in a new era where we really have to focus on these population bands. So thank you.
With that further discussion, is anyone interested in continuing the item, or shall we? My second question is, shall we revisit this item after the next?
Revisit.
Both? Get a call for the room, please. Vote for that and support. move the item and revisit it.
Aye.
Agreement on that item? Thank you. With that, we'll move to item number 5, review of key considerations for the TIP development process and review the discussion of federal SVG programming in the draft RTA roadway outlets project worksheet for the FY 24-28 TIP. With that, I'd like to
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have some slides I want to walk through on this item. You'll see at the bottom of this slide, it's for discussion and possible action. And so I'm going to introduce this, and then we're going to start talking about the worksheet that most of you should be very familiar with from earlier this year, but some changes have been made, and we're going to focus today on the SDBG portion. So if I may, if you have the slides, Crystal. Okay. So hopefully most of this, if not all of this, is just for your review, but there's been, a pause in our activity, at least with the committees. So we want to just remind everybody about some of the key points that we've shared with committees over the past year, given that this is such a unique TIP development cycle. It's the first one that includes program years beyond the sunset of the current RTA plan. In previous TIP development cycles, programming funds on RTA road development projects was guided clearly by the RTA board approved IGAs or the RTA plan funding targets based on the RTA administrative code. Now that those board approved IGAs and the administrative code targets have been met, supplemental funding on projects will be provided on a case-by-case basis as funding is identified. RTA funds will be programmed at the board's sole discretion through the RTA budgeting process. And there's, because of this, we're now in the supplementation phase for RTA. There's less flexibility to simply roll over or park funds on projects, regardless of whether or not they're being actively managed or construction. So until a new TIP is developed and adopted, we can continue to amend the current TIP as needed. And we were successful in working with the TIP subcommittee last spring to do just that. So most of you have probably seen the memo that was shared with the TIP subcommittee in late March, referring to a memo that was shared with the regional council related to the March 23rd, 23 meeting. So at that March 23rd regional council meeting, we had 3 points that we discussed and that were articulated in the memo. So PAG has more time to complete development of the TIP that was acknowledged by the regional council. And the direction from that meeting cited above provides more time, understanding that the federal requirement for approval of a new TIP is by May of 2025. Again, this is from that memo in March. Since that time, we've been talking about trying to get approval of the FY 24, 20 through 28 TIP completed by May of 2024. So even though you see May of 2025 as the latest, we're going to be working towards May of next year, calendar year. 2, identify RTA projects that can be A, federalized so the region's suballocation of federal SDBG can be programmed in fiscal years 27 and 28, followed by B, programming per 12-6 funds on projects in those fiscal years. So we're going to be talking today about fiscal years 27 and 28, specifically SDBG and any required 5.7% match. And then the third item, moving forward to address funding needs on RTA roadway element projects, the RTA board will program supplemental RTA excise tax or sales tax dollars on projects that are construction ready on a pay-as-you-go basis. So again, we've talked about this before. The RTA funds will not be programmed through the TIP development, through the TIP subcommittee process, but through the RTA. Yes.
Thanks, Jamie. On that third point there, I have 2 questions. One is, did the RTA board take specific action? Is that the language from the action they took? Or I guess that's the question. And then the second question is define construction ready.
So was there a motion by the RTA board to program in that way? I'd have to go back and look, but I guess to that point, because we no longer have the administrative code targets to work with, and we're talking about supplemental funding, the RTA board is the only governing body that is authorized to make those decisions to add funding to projects. So it's not really something that a PAG committee or subcommittee could really take action on by statute. In terms of defining construction ready, I'm looking over at my colleague Rick to see if you have any comments on that.
Ad ready clearances, permits, all right of ways acquired, utilities clear, project ready to add 100% design, those would be kind of all basic qualities, characteristics that we define, project ready to go. Headed, if you're using alternate deliveries, things like that. Essentially all the normal things that a project will experience.
So how does a project get to construction ready if we're not allowed to utilize RTA funds to purchase right of way?
So this is a prioritization. It's not a denial, but I think it's looking at it and saying, we've got a backlog right now of jobs. We got to make sure that are stacked up, and in this escalating situation we're in with cost estimates continuing to increase, the quicker we can clear that off, get product out the streets, get it in the ground and get it going, then we can deal with whatever fallout ramifications.
So the
So I wouldn't look at it
RTAs,
as a denial, it's more of the emphasis right now is getting that back.
I guess what I'm struggling with, Rick, is you're telling me that it's okay to delay projects because we can't buy right of way to move those projects
Okay.
forward?
I think what I'd like to do at this time is to cut in and say, let's complete this section of the slideshow presentation, and then we can revisit this item.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I think we will try to acknowledge that situation, Mr. Credio, when we talk about the worksheet, we look at the updated total cost estimates and what we're dealing with. Hopefully that'll make more sense when we go through that prioritization process. So this is my last slide until we get to questions, and then we'll start to talk about the worksheet. Wanted to share some just quick bullets on some recent activities since March. So in terms of that memo, it says, start to work with the subcommittee on programming federal funds, the SDBG, in fiscal years 27 to 28. So we distributed an email to our member agencies to identify candidate projects to federalize. And so we did receive a response, one response from Pima County for the First Avenue project. We've also held meetings, and this has also kind of been discussed earlier today, with ADOT staff to discuss forecasted changes to federal funding, including the greater than 200,000 population band SDBG program on RTA roadway element projects, which David covered. Developed updated SDBG funding forecast, which David covered. And in coordination with our member agencies and partners would include the Airport Authority, we conducted through Carolyn's leadership in coordination with James, the fiscal year 23 to 24 rollovers of HERF 12-6, RTA and local funds, as she reported earlier. And then finally, we updated the RTA roadway element projects worksheet that was used last winter, spring for TIP subcommittee program. So I'll pause there for any additional questions, comments, and then I'd like to, this is all part of the same item, shift it over to James to walk us through the changes that he's made to that programming worksheet. And then we'll walk through some ideas in terms of how we program the SDBG. And again, today's focus is on the SDBG. We'd like to come back to this, the TIP subcommittee at a future date and work on programming recommendations for the HERF 12-6. So pause there, any questions on that?
I don't know if it's the right time to ask the question, but one concern I have is back when the action was taken by the RTA board in, what was it, 2014, 2015, when we knew there was going to be a funding shortfall and using the regional funding to make sure that each project hit the RTA ballot amount, the way that was phrased, recall and an interpretation of those actions were we would use RTA and then we would fill it up with regional funds. And then if projects needed additional funding, those were discussions that would happen at the TIP subcommittee. And the way that the TIP that we're starting with right now and rolling into these conversations, we hit ballot amount using regional funds, not with RTA funds, which is what's pushing all of this decision-making to just the RTA board sole decision-making or however it was phrased. So I feel like we could almost back up, hit the ballot amounts with RTA because that is what the legislation was for. And then there'd be a lot more funding that is really for this group that delivers projects to talk about how we implement projects or deliver them by the point, whatever the task is. So I'm a little confused why we've lost the original action in the programming exercises.
And, I apologize, I don't have the latest motion from the RTA board in front of me, but I believe there was a motion that superseded that 2014 action, and the direction from the regional council on the TIP development process was pretty clear that we would start with the SDBG, followed by the HERF, followed by the RTA. So I think that's for this TIP subcommittee for today's work, that's the best we can go on, but appreciate your comments and concerns.
And if I may, the STBG funding source is the most challenging for our regional partners. And so our hope is that we can program those dollars today, follow up with the HERF money, and our most lenient really is the RTA funding. As long as we're in alignment with the administrative manual or also refer to it, then that funding source much easier for everyone in this room to take through reimbursement, say, perhaps. And so our hope today is to program the STBG funding on projects, and then we can move to the next phase. We also just wanted to, maybe we should mention this, that the match would be covered by HERF on these STBG projects. Any other questions on this, or can we move forward to the program? So. Bump it up a little bit for us, so everyone may not be as clear as it was, or a little bit younger.
Thank you. Good morning. So this is similar to the worksheet that we shared last fall and winter. Made an addition here.
James, can you pick up just a little bit, please?
Hear me better? So this is similar to the sheet that we shared last fall and winter. We've added fiscal years 27 and 28. And the worksheet that we shared in January was only 24 to 26 fiscal years. Just to refresh everyone's memories, we include the remaining project cost estimate, the best we have to date, and then we subtract ineligible costs like utilities. We add in local funds that are non-RTA sources or non-supplanted, and then we show the funding need minus those ineligible costs. So the numbers, for the most part, reflect what was discussed in January. But we have, thanks to Rick Ellis's work, we have updated the remaining project cost estimates. So those are updated, as are the ineligible costs. There are instances where we just use the flat 5%, but there are several projects where we have more specific numbers to use. And I have also added this federalized tag to those projects, which are currently federalized with STBG. So in January, we discussed First Avenue. As everyone knows, that's a deferred project currently. But we did add dollars in fiscal years 28. There was interest in providing some design dollars in fiscal years 26 to fiscal year 26. Since it's currently deferred, I just set it fiscal year 27. And we found that there were some local funds obligated to that project of $700,000. So I removed the $700,000, or we removed the $700,000 of RTA that was set aside for design, and included it in the amounts in fiscal years 28. Because at this point, STBG is also considered a supplanted funding source. So that was what we discussed in January, and some small changes have been made since then. We have the revised remaining project cost, which is about $1 million higher than it was in January. Questions on that project? I'm not sure I mentioned this, but there are 2 sheets we're working with. So this is just more or less what we discussed in January, and then we'll move to the B sheet where we attempt to program those STBG dollars that remain unprogrammed, and also address the annual reduction of about $800,000 in STBG.
Is it possible for you to either email this sheet so we can follow along on our own machine, or print it?
I'll see what I can do.
Okay, because I think I've made the comment, if I need a calculator during the meeting, I'm probably not going to vote on an item. And these are all new numbers. Maybe we saw them 7 months ago. I don't remember what we discussed 7 months ago to this level of detail.
So for the most part, this should reflect tip approved. But there are some changes based on our discussions. So if you were to look at the tip, it might not be identical in all cases. Yes, there's a lot going on here, I agree. But I think when we get to the next sheet, and we just are focusing on the STBG and finding a home for those dollars, then it might clarify some.
It might, but I'm not going to be able to flip back and forth the way I would like to. So
No, I understand, I do. Okay. Do my best. So if there are no questions on the north piece of First Avenue, then I'll move on to 22nd Street. So we provided some augmented funding in January based on the increased cost estimate. This reflects, I did change this from the January meeting. This reflects the revised STBG dollars for fiscal 24, but I was able to make up for it elsewhere. So the total amount of programming you see here on the right remains the same, as do the dollar amounts by funding source. They're just spread they're placed in different years in some instances. I also added in the $25 million raise grant under the various funding sources line. So in January, we had programmed $137 million. At that time, we only lacked about 1.6 million, making the project whole. Now we have a revised cost estimate of 181 million. So at this time, the need is 42.5 million, and that does not take into account approximately $11 million that has been expended since the January meeting. That is an outside funding source. So the total need is closer to $54 million. So that's where we stand on 22nd Street currently.
If I may, James.
Yes.
Thank you. Kind of going back to that previous comment about can we see the worksheet? I guess I wanted to step back. We thought about actually sending this out, but we also thought there's so much that changed. When you see a reduction in SDBG from the 16+ million down to 15, we'd have to explain all of that. So we recognize that there's a lot to digest. We thought it's just going to be easier if we have a meeting, explain everything. And if we, I don't know that we expect that we're going to have action, to be honest. We can follow up and share the worksheet and we can do calculations, but I don't know, do you need it like right now? Or can we just zoom in and kind of look closely at it together?
If there's no action, then fine, I guess. It's a much less productive use of all of our time when I didn't know we were going to get into this level of specificity with changes in this meeting. So in advance of meetings, it's really helpful so we kind of can think through the numbers.
Okay.
So if I may, numbers for the most part to reflect what we're being. So I point out the exceptions. But these are discussed in January. I realize it was several months ago, but this would be familiar if you were to look back in January.
I'll look at the full packet.
You would see. I did make changes, as I mentioned, to this amount based on our new numbers. So we're taking what we discussed in January, and it's just the next step, based on our best information. So if we then we go to Barraza, 22nd Street, and since we're more flexible, yes, we can make that payment to DDOT, the payments for our obligation. We're able to move those dollars around, push them out slightly to provide for 22nd Street short term. And then with Valencia, are there any questions on 22nd Street Barraza?
I didn't thought I see that you've kept the same amount of total programming, but you had to reduce the STBG. You said you made it up in other areas, but I didn't catch exactly.
So the totals are the same by source, just not by year. That's the 137,076 is exactly the amount that was built in the January meeting. So essentially HERF was increased, the rest of being in a different year, but we did maintain these numbers out here. So those are identical. The only thing that's changed on this line is the we have a revised cost estimate, which is obviously much higher. Everything else should be the same.
And the local funds have not been reduced at all. I know I'm just concerned about local match for both the RAISE grant and the STB program.
So the RAISE grant we discussed, we had it in the totals. It was back in a prior, it wasn't in this cell. It's been added, but it was part of all, it was included in the total that year. So we showed the 112,076, and then we noted the $25 million RAISE grant here. And so all the information was available, but I took this to the next level by adding the RAISE grant itself for the various lines. So we have 107. So again, we had reduced the funding need to about 1.3 million based on the old project cost estimate. I believe the we had here in January was approximately 145 million. 5,700 like that. So Valencia, the changed the ballot amount, increased STBG, for pushed it out a year to fiscal 27. So that's a change from the January meeting.
If I may, James,
Yeah.
didn't we end up refederalizing this because we're trying to find a home for the SDBG?
So I don't recall if we defederalized and refederalized post meeting, or if that's an action we took at the meeting. But right, it is federalized, and there was a time where we had defederalized project. You can see we removed the RTA dollars.
It appears it would be very helpful for everyone if we can share those spreadsheets. So, I'd like to give everyone the opportunity to log in. Wi-Fi, we have the listing here on the wall. Have you share that and check your email. Share that information. Thank you, Jane. Pausing, maybe
So Cal continue.
Go ahead and continue through to the next item.
So really today's focus is this second sheet. And we're attempting to program all the SDB dollars to fiscal 28 on projections David provided. So on this sheet, we did take $700,000 in place of fiscal 26. Increased the STBG on the newest cost estimate. Make the project whole. So we added that amount, fiscal 28. And see funding needs met. More portion of first. And then based on the most recent project cost estimate on the grant, there are, although well within ballot, that we've reduced funding based on previous cost estimates. There's a slight increase now. We added $1 million of this for 12R, slightly outside of our scope today, but information. And we've also made that project whole based on the most recent cost estimate of $27,199,000. So if we move down to 22nd Street, maintain the STBG reduction 24. Have RT dollars rolled over the last few years between the raise grant here and local dollars. And the most recent project cost estimate is $181 million. You're able to increase the amount of programming using STBG by about $9.4 million. And we reduced programming on Barraza and pushed it out a year, providing that $9.4 million to our obligation for these two fiscal years, 26 and 27, by that amount on 22nd Street to increase their funding to $146,526,000. Previous amount was 137 million. So by doing that, we reduced the need to the 33 million plus. We have to add the 11.7 million that has been expended from another funding source. So you're able to contribute slightly to that project need. But there's still about $44 million remaining on the funding need. And we achieved this by sliding Barraza over by a year, providing them the $9.4 million at this 28.
And we're anticipating that the match for the STBG you're showing in 27 and 28 will come from her.
So I missed the math on that, but add the match to it, and we have the curve capacity. So
match 285,605.
there were no changes to Valencia from the first sheet. That remained the same. So if we go based on that programming, go down to the STBG line, we're able to program all the STBG to fiscal 28. Anyone have any comments or questions?
Can you go back up to the?
James, can I ask you, were there a certain number of projects that we identified for the STBG funding? Are there 3 or 4 total that were identified? Like, I do believe we heard from the county that they were interested in their First Avenue project.
Have 4.
Mind just reading those to us?
Sure. Ballot 13, First Avenue, Orange Grove to Ina. Providing $1,506,000 of STBG. Ballot 15. I'm sorry. Ballot 19, 22nd Street. We're providing $47,972,000 of STBG.
Over 2 or 3 years?
Over 4.
4 years.
And ballot 20, Baraz Aviation Parkway. We are providing $16,121,000. That's over 4 fiscal years. And ballot 23, Valencia Road I-19 to Alvernon.
Okay.
We are providing $9,241,000. For projects.
And what was the total? Are you able to provide the total sum of those?
Well, I can provide initially the total STBG program, fiscal years 24 through 28 is $88,648,000.
I could ask, I do believe that we've been able to share those, the Excel sheet with you, just coming from our team. Please check your email, and then we could take just a quick break and take a look at those, get our spreadsheets open. There's show of hands. Can I see if, has everyone received them yet? Thank you.
And 2 of them, are they both the same?
There's the first one, kind of was the overall.
Okay.
The second one was the page.
Closer to the January discussion, the first.
And you did add the HERF, the non-federal match as HERF to one of the projects, right? What was that? 86, yeah.
86, right.
On that, on the Barazas, so the changes to what's currently programmed, basically, you reduce the funding in those 2 years and basically deferred it into 28. The totals the same.
Totals are the same. Yep. Yeah. So that was just allowed us to increase funding in 26 and 57 for 22nd Street.
Okay. Would you like us to walk through that again, Mark?
Let me show you.
I see it. Yeah.
The STBG was heavier for Baraza in 26 or 27. And we excluded out. So the 9.4 million now is in fiscal 28.
That may we have to look at that. Because what your sheet is not showing is ADOT construction funding. It's also 28. So we need to have that money that you're moving is right away. So we need to have the right of way cleared before we start construction. Here, I'm not sure if that's why we need to look at those types of issues. Kind of outside of your purview.
But for the record, I'd just like to say that Mr. Credio left at 11:09 and he has allowed his vote to be Bravo with Candy Davis.
Quick question, Rod, what was the construction on 210?
Right now, we're tentatively 28.
No, sorry.
But we haven't shared that because nobody's been programmed out that far. That's why it's very tentative.
Just a couple of small exceptions will be accomplished here today with this sheet is providing increased funding for 22nd Street and exhausting the STPG programming for fiscal 28. Even though it's busy and there's a lot going on, those are really kind of two main accomplishments for the second worksheet.
Plus the fully funding first half.
Right, and we also provided $1 million per for grant UP.
Ms. Skinner, on the First Avenue project, were you able to look?
Yeah, my concern on that one is I haven't looked at the breakdown on this project of design versus construction costs. I mean, I see that we are matching what we have from the most recent HDR estimates. But I think the design is going to be more than 700,000. So I think, really there'll be funding needed in 26 and 27 in order to make a 28 federal authorization. And I also question, I see that there's RTA money showing up at 28. Should that be shown as a different funding source that's more secured in that year? Oh, no, it's 12R. I was reading that wrong.
Got my attention.
There's a lot of stuff on these sheets, guys.
So
We're programming 12.6 on 28.
So Jose, our goal today is to program our STBG and utilize the HERT 12R as a means to meet the match.
There is there's some programming to meet the match, and we made a couple of exceptions to make projects whole. Relatively small amounts for the STBG we're talking about, but
just for the magic. Okay.
So grant. That's not a match. We just added $1 million to make it whole, and it's within ballot, well within ballot. It's just higher than a previous cost estimate.
Madam Chair, we have to, ADOT has to leave. We have another appointment at 11:30. I would like to defer this vote to give everybody an opportunity to digest this. And I'd like to make a motion on the floor to defer it to another meeting. Just tell everybody the spreadsheets, we can look at it. And so that forth is a motion.
Is there a second? Supporting that?
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
Maybe just, if you give us a little quick summary, James, just what are the changes? There's a lot of moving parts, I think. For folks.
So if we go to North First, ballot 13.
If I may, I think that ADOT needs to
Yeah, you don't have to do another one.
Yeah, so.
Displacement, little summary. It's not, okay, this is what we're trying to do.
Oh.
We said, oh, it's ready, not right now.
Yeah, I would just add to that, like, if you can detail out STBG in this fiscal year on this project and replace with or 12R in this, so it's just more clear, so we don't have to go back and forth for the changes. Make it easier for us, since you already have that information in your head.
Make it easier for us.
And just to add to all of this is there was no action at our last meeting, so the spreadsheet isn't like set in stone as a starting point. In my mind, we have the existing tip, but every time we do a new tip, numbers move all over. So it's a starting place, but I think we need to be cautious about portraying it as something that there was any action.
I think it's the outcome.
Great, thank you. Can I get any other discussion or do a voice votes? Table this item for further discussion.
Aye.
That was motion passes. And now we need to return. Thank you for joining us today, making the trip in. Returning to item number 4, review of the updated federal surface transportation block grant funding projection for FY 24 to 28. Fiscal constraint. Is there any further discussion on this item?
I think it's premature for us to take any action, especially if we're tabling the other portion.
I do think it might be helpful if you could walk us through what your concerns were on this item, so we could be.
So my concern is that the TIP subcommittee, one of their, objectives is to meet fiscal constraints. And I don't understand how we can even run that mathematical check with the, limited portion of the SDBG, just over 200,000. So I'm not sure if we're doing fiscal constraint by population bands. And if that's the case, everything needs to be spelled out that way. I also am very concerned about the piecemeal approach, because although it is important to identify projects that can be federalized first, a project is not a project unless you can deliver it. And that's the combination of all funding sources. And so although from like an academic perspective, we may have reached some total of dollars, it doesn't mean that it's achievable. And I think that's been demonstrated by what Rod said about having right-of-way before construction, what Sam said about right-of-way before construction, and all these project elements. And so I think my concern is on the TIP development process as a whole, mapping out how we plan to get there, because the piecemeal approach didn't work last time. That's why we carried over 2 years worth of 12R and a full year of RTA. And so it's upon us to actually make decisions that create projects that can be built.
Thank you for providing that information to us. I think it would be helpful for us to understand why using kind of the geological kind of format of using the different fund sources, how that isn't working here.
So in my mind, if we're using the construction metaphor, when you pour a wall made out of concrete, you do it in lifts, and you look at your mix design and you make sure you vibrate it down and get all the funding sources. You don't do a 10-foot wall in one pour. So using the stone, pebble sand analogy doesn't even play out in the construction world we live in. And that's the same thing I'm saying here. Like, we have to look year by year and make sure that we're using funds in a way that builds a solid project.
So if I may, I believe that's what our intent is here, is to provide those large stones, put them in place, use the STBG first, because that's the most challenging funding that we have in the region. For dollars to backfill and then hold off and allow the board to make the final decision on that.
I don't think that we're gonna be able, and what I was saying is you have to look year by year in that order, but you can't do all the years stone and then all of the years sand, if you will. You have to actually be able to say this project can be delivered with all the funding sources. Because if we don't get a yes on the RTA, then we have nothing. We start again. And that's what I feel like we did last time. We just said, academically, we met the ballot, let's call it good. The board will solve it. There's policies that are missing. There's been no action on those policies in 3 years. And we're kind of going about this the same way as last time, which has been fairly ineffective from a project delivery standpoint.
If I may, really the focus of this unintentionally is 22nd Street. And so it is construction ready. It's ready to go. It needs dollars. And the SDBG, fortunately, they will contribute to that. And it's focused on one project. So I understand the overall picture, but unintentionally, we're focused on 22nd Street here. And it's a sterilized project. There's an immediate place for those dollars to go.
Right, and we've had this conversation before as well. That's a tip amendment. If we have dollars we can activate to make that project go tomorrow, that's a tip amendment. We do those all the time. I don't know why. I guess I don't see.
So this exercise is not as complicated as it appears, right? Because those dollars, for the most part, are plugged into 2 or 3 projects. And I'm not sure that this doesn't address the larger issue. This is a step in the process.
I hear what you're saying. I don't see that we are on a path forward where we have said where our decision points are and our concerns. We haven't had a conversation about the status directly from the sponsoring agencies that have to deliver it on what their concerns are. You know, it's been a presentation of PAG staff synthesis of the data. And I'm not questioning that you didn't appropriately place it. I'm saying there's not enough info. And I don't think we're going down a path where we're going to do this in a timely manner when we find out the information at the time of the meeting. It's just not an effective way to like think through these things.
If I may.
Huge numbers we're talking about.
There, and I wonder, would you like to hear from member agencies on the statuses of their projects? Would that be helpful to the committees?
I think it would be in terms of prioritization. I mean, we have a whole bunch of money that's not getting spent. And how can we make that money usable? Like what's the priority? Which order should we be looking at these in? And if some of them should be a tip amendment, we don't want to wait until May to get 22nd Street the money, if that's what we're talking about. Like that doesn't make sense either.
Okay. So I'm hearing it would be helpful if each one of these projects had an update, maybe at the tip subcommittee level, go through and then we can discuss the funding piece.
And I would suggest, I see Andy's kind of raising his hand, like a plan of how you envision developing this. When are we going to see the forecast revenues? When are we going to see a call for project? When are we going to talk about our own funding shortfalls? And then you start plugging in those holes and you have this comprehensive discussion. And we all recognize that RTA projects are the priority. Those are established as a policy in our TIP and have been since the get-go. So I don't think that's at question. It's just, let us see a little bit further into the future than when we sit down and find out the next hour of what we're going to talk about.
Okay, I do believe that Mr. Brown presented the plan for you for the committee earlier in this agenda item.
Was there a timeline on that? I'm sorry, I missed it. I saw.
We did not provide a timeline, but we can.
Yeah.
That's our intent going forward. So we want to actually present at future committees like we did last fall and winter. So it's kind of a kickoff. I'm hearing that it didn't work so well for you to get the worksheet the day of, but we thought that walking through and explaining it versus sending out a weekend ahead of time with some changes to SDBG maybe was a better approach, but I'm hearing some concerns about that. But we can share the worksheet out going forward. We did that last winter and spring. We would share it ahead of the meeting. So we're flexible and we can provide a timeline for when things will roll out. We are working again with the direction provided at that, from that regional council meeting in terms of that stepwise approach. So that was.
That's
the top.
that, and I understand
Yeah.
that.
And
I
in terms
think
of,
a timeline is so helpful.
yeah, we can provide it.
Is there anything else or we give Andy a moment?
Yeah, I just want to add, I think one of the ththings that's hard for us to do about 22nd Street, it's okay, we can say, sure, we can take that this TPG and 27, 28 on it, but as you saw, we're still showing shortfall, $40 million shortfall, so we're not able to be clearly deliver the project. We know there's 12R and RTA money sitting out there, but I understand that the regional council will be prefer to program those funds above the ballot, but I would think that this group can make a recommendation, and it would be helpful for us to be able to see all those funding sources, so we can try and make a recommendation for how to fill that shortfall. It's a great outline of RTA money, but what we would think we would need to present to the board, and it's hard for us to do that now when we're just federal funds. So, yeah, I think it's what I hear you saying, Catherine, about let's look at all the funding sources and make a recommendation. It funds.
This is an informational item. This does show her dollars as well, bottom of the sheet, so you can see what her dollars will be available later in the program. We're going to take that step today. We're going to just one piece at a time, but you have those dollars as we see them program for fiscal 28. So that could maybe contribute to the discussion.
David, is there anything you'd like to add?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I guess just curious what other member agencies think about this. I mean, I think we've heard from a couple, one or two member agencies, but we're a region. So if there's other feedback for us to improve our process, got concerns, suggestions, or see what we're trying to do.
I think it would be very beneficial, like Catherine said, we can hear from the jurisdictions. For example, that 22nd project, as far as I can remember, shortfall, there was shortfall funds, and we thought we were almost there, and then we're short again. But this is a bigger amount. Like, we need to hear from the jurisdictions. Where are the challenges? Right? I mean, what's going on with the project? Why is that moving ahead? That's the reason why I think it's beneficial. We do hear from that project.
I would agree. I'd second that, to hear what everybody's challenges are, so that we can make a better informed decision.
We're here to actually, if we can as a group, as a region, deliver those projects. We can't do that if we don't know what's going to be. Obstacles on. But what the city doing, or the county, because obviously the other one. He tells us what the issues are. The group work together. Yeah, I think that works for all of us.
No, I mean, I really appreciate your time, everyone, and the feedback. I think that'll help us moving forward. Thank you for that suggestion. And I guess, we haven't set a date for a future meeting. We wanted to see how this meeting would go. But I would imagine we'd be looking at another meeting in October. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts or concerns. Some folks want to avoid fall break, for example, because
October 9th.
okay, that the week of October 9th, I hear is bad. So, but I don't have anything more on this. Just thank you, everybody. I think this is helpful for moving forward for another meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Round. I do wonder if there's anyone online that would like to provide a comment. We haven't heard from you today. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, members of the committee. Again, our goal here is to be as open and transparent with this process as possible. We appreciate your feedback. All of the numbers that we provide at all of our meetings are up to date as much as possible, and we're sharing them openly with you. So understand that's our intent here. With that, I'd like to ask if we can item 4. Well, my understanding, let's just do a motion for item 4. We're going to continue this item until future notice, perhaps our next meeting. Can I?
Moved.
Voice vote, please.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And then we move to item 7, adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
11:30. Thank you, everyone.